October 28, 1942. Rabaul, New Britain Island. The voice of the Tokyo broadcaster rang with pride, firm, victorious. The American carrier Enterprise has been destroyed. Again. Japanese sailors cheered beneath the metal ribs of their warships. Officers nodded. One even poured a second cup of tea. They'd sunk her before. They were certain of it. During the Battle of Santa Cruz just days earlier. Bombs tore through her flight deck. Smoke rose in black columns. Men had been seen leaping into the sea. They called her the Gray Ghost. And now, at last, she was gone. Or so they thought. 3 days later, she returned. Not just afloat, but furious, launching dive bombers over the Solomon Sea, strafing Japanese positions with unholy precision. A signal operator aboard the cruiser Chikuma whispered at first, "She won't die." And yet, no one knew, not yet, that this American ship wasn't surviving by chance. She was surviving by design. She was born in secrecy, laid down in Newport News, Virginia, in the heat of 1934. Designated CV-6, the Enterprise was the 7th U.S. Navy ship to bear the name. But none before had been forged for a war like this. She was long, lean, and fast, able to steam over 33 knots. Her decks stretched nearly the length of 3 football fields. Inside, she carried 90 aircraft, hundreds of tons of fuel, and 2,000 men trained to operate like a single muscle. But what made her dangerous wasn't size. It was speed, not just on the water, but in her thinking. Before the war even began, Enterprise was everywhere. December 7th, 1941. She was just west of Oahu, returning from a secret mission to deliver Marine fighters to Wake Island. Her planes were the first to respond to the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Then came the Doolittle Raid. April 1942. Enterprise escorted the Hornet, launching American bombers toward Tokyo. It wasn't a strategic victory, but it shook the Japanese home front to its core. In June, she fought at Midway, dodging torpedoes, launching wave after wave. 3 Japanese carriers went down in flames. Enterprise came back with scorched decks and a new reputation. She was the ship that always returned. The Imperial Navy started watching her movements like a shadow. From Saipan to the Solomon Islands, Enterprise was always there, always striking, always vanishing. Japanese sailors began whispering rumors. They said she had been sunk before, but always rebuilt. They said she had armor blessed by Roosevelt himself. Some even said her crew made deals with death. To the Japanese mind, war was spiritual, honor-bound, a clash of warriors. But this ship, this thing, was something else. They didn't yet understand that she was part of a new kind of war, one not bound by ritual or fate, one powered by machines, by fuel, by numbers. Rear Admiral Taman Yamaguchi, a fierce believer in the Bushido Code, once told his staff, "A man who does not fear death cannot be beaten." But after facing Enterprise twice, he began to suspect it wasn't that the Americans didn't fear death. It was that they didn't have to. Because their warships were built to outlive the men who sailed them. The air above Guadalcanal shimmered with heat and tension. August 24th, 1942. The Battle of the Eastern Solomons. Enterprise surged forward again, guns bristling, decks humming. Her pilots launched wave after wave against Japanese positions. Below decks, crewmen moved like clockwork, fueling, rearming, patching holes between strikes. But then, they came. Japanese dive bombers, shrieking like demons, fell from the sky. One struck her port side, then another hit aft. A third drilled through the flight deck, erupting in fire. Men were thrown like rag dolls. Steel screamed. Smoke choked the hangars. From a scout plane above, Petty Officer Masaru Saito watched it unfold. He scribbled into his flight log, "She is burning. She must be dead." As the flames climbed higher, an officer aboard the Shokaku allowed himself a rare smile. "The ghost burns," he said. But back on Enterprise, something unexpected happened. The fire crews, scorched, bloodied, didn't abandon their posts. They swarmed the flames like ants. They used foam, sand, bare hands. And then they launched planes again. 2 hours later, Wildcats lifted off her broken deck. The smoke still hung in the air, but she was fighting. Saito's pilot circled back. "Impossible," he muttered. By nightfall, the ghost had vanished again, into the Pacific mist. In the belly of a Japanese cruiser, a mechanic whispered to no one in particular, "She should be gone. Why isn't she gone?" The question hung heavier than the smoke. 2 months later, October 26, 1942. The Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands erupted like thunder across the waves. Enterprise returned, again. Her hull still bore the scars from Guadalcanal, patched steel, welded plates, but her flight deck gleamed, ready. Her squadrons launched at dawn, slicing through tropical clouds toward the Japanese fleet. But the enemy was waiting. Dive bombers screamed down from above. One pierced the forward elevator. Another detonated near her island tower. Flames burst skyward, men screamed, radios crackled with Mayday signals. Aboard the Zuikaku, Captain Kenji Maeda observed through binoculars as Enterprise was swallowed by fire. "She's finished," he declared. But he was wrong. Smoke poured from her sides. Holes opened in her flight deck. Still, her planes kept launching. Mechanics dragged bombs by hand. Gunners with bandaged arms manned their turrets. Somewhere on deck, a wounded sailor shouted through the chaos, "Keep her alive! She's not done yet." At 13:12 hours, a Nakajima pilot spotted her again. "Impossible," he radioed. "She's still operational." Another burst of flak answered. The gray ghost had teeth. That night, in the sickbay of a damaged Japanese destroyer, a pilot named Aoki muttered feverishly, "She burns. She always burns. But she never dies." A medic asked what he meant. Aoki stared at the ceiling. "She was on fire. I saw it. We all saw it. But she fired back. She always fires back." On the bridge of Enterprise, Rear Admiral Thomas Kincaid gritted his teeth, gripping the railing as damage reports poured in. He knew she was hurt, but she was still afloat, still in the fight. And that was enough. Far to the west, in Tokyo, a radio announcer again declared, "Enterprise has been sunk. Victory is near." But inside the ranks, something had shifted. They had claimed her death too many times, and she kept coming back. November 1st, 1942. Lieutenant Hiroshi Tanaka sat cross-legged on the deck of the Kumano, a battered notepad balanced in his lap. The sea was calm, but his thoughts churned. They had celebrated her death. Again. Tokyo radio said she was gone, sunk, consumed by American flames. But then, a signal report from the Solomons. Carrier CV-6 launching aircraft. Location confirmed. Status active. Tanaka felt his breath catch. His pencil paused mid-stroke. He had seen her go under with his own eyes. At Santa Cruz, she had taken 3 direct hits. Her decks glowed red. Smoke blanketed the sky. Even the Americans had signaled for retreat. And yet there she was again. Fighting, flying, alive. He scribbled into his journal, "This cannot be. War is a test of courage, of men. But this ship, She returns like a spirit. We shoot her down. She rises. We burn her decks. She launches more planes. He turned to his bunkmate, Ensign Kazuo Mori, and asked in a hushed voice, "What if we're not fighting ships anymore? What if we're fighting something else?" Mori didn't answer. He just stared at the ceiling, at a small metal hook swinging from the bulkhead. Left, right, a rhythm like breath. Outside, the wind had picked up. Tanaka watched the waves and realized something terrible. A thought he could not silence. What if the Enterprise cannot be killed? Because the Americans never expected her to survive. What if she was built not for glory, but for replacement? It felt wrong, blasphemous. But deep inside, he knew. This ship was a lie, and the war was no longer what they thought it was. 4 days. That's all it took. After the flames of Santa Cruz, Enterprise limped eastward under her own power. Her decks torn open, elevators jammed, she crawled toward a floating dry dock near Noumea, New Caledonia. American crews were already waiting. They didn't pray. They didn't hesitate. They worked in 3 shifts: day, night, dawn. Welding, hammering, cutting, replacing. Prefabricated parts arrived by plane, not just metal, but entire sections of bulkhead, gear assemblies, radar housings. The Navy had built spares for everything, even the parts they didn't yet know they would need. 4 days later, she sailed again. Not limping, not patched, ready. The Japanese couldn't believe it. They had carriers too. Proud names like Shokaku, Kaga, Akagi, but when damaged, they vanished for months, sometimes forever. Their repair yards were limited. Replacement parts had to be crafted, not shipped. Their ships were symbols, honored, singular, and sacred. But the Americans, they built theirs like tools. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto once remarked, "Japan can fight for 6 months. After that, I have no confidence." Now the reason was clear. Enterprise wasn't just a ship. She was a template. Every bolt, every beam designed to be removed, replaced, upgraded. A Navy memo surfaced in 1943. Combat efficiency must remain above 80%, even after damage. Standardization is survival. Even damage was planned for. Tanaka heard the rumors from captured U.S. pilots of floating warehouses, of rail cars packed with spare engines, of mobile workshops that followed the fleet like ghosts of their own. It chilled him. They were not fighting men anymore. They were fighting systems. March 1943, Truk Lagoon. The heart of Japan's Pacific operations pulsed with urgency. Yet beneath the surface, behind the crisp salutes and barked orders, lived a quiet dread. Enterprise had returned again. She had struck at Kwajalein, Tarawa, and now Eniwetok. Her name was passed between crews like a ghost story. Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, once the architect of Pearl Harbor, sat alone in his quarters, thumbing a cracked photograph of the Akagi, his lost flagship. The walls around him creaked with ocean swells. A teacup rattled on his desk. He opened his leather-bound war diary and wrote, "Enterprise fights not with strength, but with memory. She returns because she is not allowed to die. We, meanwhile, bleed for every step." Outside, 2 junior officers passed in the corridor. One muttered, "She's a demon. I've flown against her twice. Every time I return, she's worse." Another added, "Her guns know where I'll be before I get there." In Tokyo, a secret intelligence brief labeled the Enterprise Kikan Teki, the machine enemy. No longer a vessel, a presence. Captured American documents revealed something deeper. production metrics. Graphs showing tonnage repaired per week. Supply ships loaded with engine blocks, screws, propeller blades, even replacement bulkheads. One Japanese analyst remarked, "This is not war. It is industry." Even the crew of the Enterprise changed constantly. Freshmen from Iowa, Montana, Alabama, replacing the fallen. Trained in weeks, slotted into duty like parts in a machine. At sea, they said little. They moved with purpose, slept in shifts, ate canned meat, and drank powdered coffee. The ship never stopped humming. Not even at night. Not even when bleeding. At a strategy meeting aboard the Yamato, an exhausted gunnery officer stood and said, "We are not fighting men. We are fighting a factory. It flies, it kills, and it cannot be sunk." No one laughed, because they all knew he was right. South Pacific, summer 1943. The Enterprise approached Espiritu Santo under a fading orange sky, her hull still pocked from battle, her antennas scorched black. But her engines never slowed. As she neared the floating dry dock, the sea below seemed to part, as if even the ocean knew to make way. Within hours, the repair crews began, but these weren't desperate patch jobs. They followed a manual. Each step, each weld, each cable, pre-written. Her damage had already been predicted. This wasn't a miracle. It was a blueprint. Every American carrier operated like this, but Enterprise led the way. Behind her followed an invisible army. Liberty ships with fuel, cranes on barges, tugs hauling spare propellers, dry docks with lathe machines, even a barge designed solely for making ice. The Red Hill underground fuel storage in Oahu pumped millions of gallons across the Pacific, a liquid artery feeding these steel beasts. A single order could move aircraft parts from Michigan to Midway in under 5 days. Meanwhile, Japan ferried parts by horse, by hand, over bombed railways and failing bridges. Aboard the Shokaku, an engineer named Lieutenant Sato scribbled bitter notes into a damp ledger. "Today we ran out of coolant valves. Shipment delayed again. Enemy repairs in 3 days. Ours estimated 29 days." The numbers spoke louder than bombs. Enterprise wasn't supernatural. She was standardized, modular, scalable. A ghost not of myth, but of mass production. Each plane she launched had identical parts. Each boiler, turbine, elevator, cataloged, replaceable. When she bled, she was bandaged. When she limped, she learned to run again. No prayers, no rituals, just process. Back in Tokyo, a fleet intelligence officer slid a memo across the desk of Rear Admiral Kusaka. "Their ships are not ships. They are systems, and they never stop moving." Kusaka didn't speak. He simply stared at the memo, then out the window. The sun was setting, and the horizon held no miracles, only machines. By late 1943, Japanese officers no longer feared defeat. They feared repetition. Enterprise struck again at Makin, again at Kwajalein, then at Truk, the so-called Gibraltar of the Pacific. Each time, her arrival was marked not by glory, but by silence. Anti-air crews froze at radar pings. Mechanics fumbled tools. Some men prayed, not for survival, but for the ship to vanish. Aboard the Zuikaku, Commander Jiro Takagi flipped through recon photos. The same scarred hull, the same battle number, CV-6, still sailing, still launching. "Does she ever stop?" he muttered. "No," came the reply. "She's American." It wasn't sarcasm. It was resignation. Behind every strike from Enterprise was a silent army. Ford factories in Michigan, rail lines from Pittsburgh, ports in San Diego, machine shops in Chicago. The Japanese could barely repair a single carrier without retooling a facility. The Americans? They built replacements before the first was even hit. Enterprise herself had received new radar, new fire control systems, even new propeller shafts, all while at sea. In a captured American briefing, Takagi read a line that chilled him. Acceptable damage threshold, 40% structural, 60% flight ops. Return to strike condition in 72 hours. They built for damage. They planned to bleed and return. Japanese naval tradition demanded honor, grace in maneuver, ceremonial launches. Enterprise came out swinging, patched, bent, blackened, like a bar fighter who knew one thing: keep hitting. Even their aircraft were built for disposability. The F-6F Hellcat wasn't elegant. It wasn't beautiful, but it could be built by the thousands, repaired in hours, flown by men barely out of school. Ensign Mori, the young Japanese pilot who once believed in precision, wrote home after his fourth mission against Enterprise. I used to think war was about skill, but this is about weight. They fight with weight. He paused, then added, we fight for survival. They fight to replace. Enterprise, more than a ship, had become a mirror, showing Japan what it could never become. And with every return, that mirror cracked deeper. Summer 1944. The Pacific burned brighter than ever. Enterprise was still there, now armored with new guns, a fresh radar array, and reinforced flight decks. She led Task Force 58 into the Mariana Islands. At Saipan, she launched 200 sorties a day. At the Battle of the Philippine Sea, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, her squadrons tore through Japanese air power, downing wave after wave. By now, Japan's carrier fleet had withered. Akagi, Kaga, Hiryu, all gone. But CV-6 still carved through the waves like a living blade. By war's end, she had fought in 20 major engagements, received 20 battle stars, and been declared sunk, officially, 3 times. Each time, she came back. Rear Admiral Kusaka, now in Tokyo, stood before a War Ministry board in late 1944. His face was pale, his voice calm. He placed a single photograph on the table, a silhouette of Enterprise taken at dusk, her deck lines glowing with launch lights. Then he spoke. We lost the war before we even fired, not because they shot better, but because they never stopped building. Across the Pacific, captured Japanese officers were shown American logistics stats. A general stood silent as a Navy analyst spoke. In 1944 alone, the U.S. produced 96,000 aircraft, 28,000 tanks, 71,000 ships. Then came the kicker. We used 2 million gallons of fuel in a single week to hold one island. A Japanese captain whispered, I lost half my division trying to seize 50,000 gallons. Enterprise wasn't unique. She was typical. She was what happened when a civilization turned war into production. An American sailor who served on her recalled, she was loud, she was fast, and she never slept. Like the whole country was under her deck plates. For the Japanese, it was never just about losing battles. It was about losing the illusion that bravery could overcome mass, that precision could defeat persistence. And Enterprise was persistence, made of steel. By 1945, with most of their fleet at the bottom of the ocean, Japan watched as new American carriers rolled off the docks, 1 per month. The war had become a math problem, and the numbers no longer lied. Spring 1953. Washington Navy Yard. Cherry blossoms bloomed along the Potomac. American children fed ducks beneath white monuments. The war was over, had been for years. But in one quiet corner of the Naval Museum, an elderly Japanese man stood still. His name was Hiroshi Tanaka. He wore a dark wool coat, a simple hat, and the stiff bearing of a man who once stood at attention for an emperor. He had come not to speak, but to see. Before him stood a weathered brass nameplate. USS Enterprise, CV-6, the Gray Ghost. He reached out with gloved fingers, tracing the letters. Each one felt cold, solid, too real. Behind him, a group of American schoolboys chattered about aircraft, battles, and medals. Tanaka didn't move. In his mind, he saw her again, rising through smoke over the Santa Cruz Islands, blackened, burning, but defiant. Always defiant. He remembered the diary entries, the disbelief, the fear, the endless returns. A museum attendant passed by, paused and offered a nod. She was something, wasn't she? Tanaka didn't answer. He only whispered, in broken English, "She never died." Outside, tourists snapped photos. Flags waved gently overhead. But inside that glass case, between the battles listed in brass, lay something heavier than metal. A memory, a ghost. Enterprise had been scrapped in 1958, her steel sold, her engines silenced. But to those who had faced her, who had watched her burn and return, vanish and reappear, she would never be gone. She was the warship they couldn't sink. Not because of luck, not because of superstition, but because America had built a civilization where even ghosts could fight and win.